Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the MMA Sucka Podcast. I am Tim Wheaton, joined as always by Frazer Krohn. But Frazer Krohn, we got a guest today, right?
We have indeed. There is his future bantamweight champion, Melissa Dixon. Melissa, how's things?
Thank you very much for asking.
Oh, you're shy on air now. You were so talkative before.
I never know what to say to direct questions. Like when someone asks me, "Are you okay?" My normal answer is, "Yeah, I'm just tired."
Yeah.
Like the same answer every time.
So, Melissa Dixon, you have a fight coming up in the next few weeks, or sorry, it's coming up in April, correct? Tell us a little bit how's the mind preparation and everything like that, because it's still a little ways out, but you have a fight upcoming.
To be fair, I need the date because my weight is always an issue, so I'm trying to get into a better position with my weight. However, the previous conversation that we just had before recording is not my friend. But yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling excited. She's a big record, a name that is good contention for like making a lot of noise for myself in the future. I've changed a little bit about my training in terms of I've lessened it. So the training that I do becomes more focused and more quality rather than doing too much. The typical saying quality over quantity. And with that, I found some of the best sessions last week for a very long time, both in motivation and energy.
Oh, sounds good. I mean, because obviously, as you alluded to, the conversation off air, I saw you in Five Guys the other night. So the way it's coming down, it's making its way down slowly but surely. And luckily, we've still got a few months until the April date. But obviously, you are from Coventry, you train out of Lions Gym. Am I right?
Yeah, Lions Gym, Coventry.
Yeah, but am I right in thinking that you headed down to London to do a bit of training down at is it GB Top Team?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did that go ahead of your April day?
So it was my first one, and it was their Nogi/wrestling live session, and that was like really good. I found I was able to hold myself really well against some top contenders. Who one's I think she's just off to Invicta at the moment. They got a few Bellator fighters over there, and I rolled with some of the guys. So like one of the dudes got their last fight on Errors, and then their head coach of their Nogi/wrestling, Ash, rolled with him. He absolutely smashed me, but I found that everyone else I did really well against. And I'm going up there tomorrow to try a different session, big gloves, small gloves sparring. So that'll be my second session tomorrow, and obviously striking and wrestling are two different contenders against each other. So that will just let me know kind of where I'm at in terms of the top players of who've been in this game a lot longer than I. So motivated, excited, but very nervous as well.
But let me ask you as well. MMA is kind of a unique sport to get into, and like most people would go into, a footy or something like that. What was the inspiration to actually get into combat sports? Were you in martial arts before? Was there a fighter that you looked up to? Like, how did it all begin for you? You have no idea. I don't know. I was at a gym one day.
It's like kind of like an awkward story. Like I used to break dance. I wasn't the best break dancer. It was just my hobby. It's what I like to do. And I split with my ex-boyfriend at the time, and I just had nothing to go into. Like I ended up living at my friend's house. My dog might bark, by the way, and if he does, I might have to run and tell him to shush. I was living at my friend's house, who lived a minute from the gym, and I would walk past the gym to go to our city centre every day. And I've always wanted to try martial arts. Like I've always wanted to do karate. Like I remember having a conversation with my sister about it. And I just walked into the gym, literally having no idea what to expect. I owned no kit. I was pretty poor. Like I was living on I was working for the Coventry Sports Foundation at the time, so a very minimal wage. And I literally walked in, and then the next day I booked myself for the free trial, and I did the whole week, every single class I could, and I just loved it. My now husband, which was one of the coaches at the time, he thought he was being punked because I guess because of breakdancing, wrestling kind of felt natural, and I was quite a strong female. I always have been strong, but now I'm even stronger. But at the time, I think he was just pleasantly surprised.
Is that what first drew him to you? He was like, "Oh, this girl's strong. This is it. My future wife right here."
His actual words were, when I walked into the gym, "Oh my God, she's hot. I fancy a bit of that." But not to me. That was what he said to Mokken, which is one of the dudes that work at the gym. And I was just like, oh, that's very appealing to hear.
Yeah. If also, I think, am I right in thinking that pretty much nobody wants to fight your husband? He's constantly match for fights, pullouts, match for fights, pullouts. So if there's any, is he still an amateur or is he a pro now?
He's pro. He's 4-2, 4-3, 4-2 pro.
4-2,
so he is beatable.
Exactly, but any pro guys in and around, West Midlands, Coventry, Birmingham, anywhere, get in touch because this guy cannot get a fight.
Yeah, 77 kilo.
Fight him, 77 kilos. Just fight. Come on, I follow both of your careers, and I think for the past 2 or 3 fights he's been scheduled, and then someone's pulled out, and someone's had to fill in, and someone's pulled out, and someone's had to. But this has been going back years
since he was amateur.
So maybe he needs to come across as maybe a little less, scary, a little less of a tough guy, and people will want to actually fight him. That's the problem that he has, I think, at the moment, is people don't want the smoke. But yeah, guys, get in touch because it's getting a bit repetitive now for Melissa and her husband to be preparing for a fight, and then nobody wants to smoke. Let's hope that your opponent in April actually makes the walk. But regardless,
weight.
Yeah, that's another issue.
Big girl.
She because am I right in thinking that your last fight was at Feather? Was it last fight at Feather or the one?
No, the one before.
But
that was because it was 2 weeks' notice after a bantamweight bout, and I didn't even know I was going to fight until they contacted me.
That's the problem, isn't it?
Too much of a problem. Food is a problem.
But let's jump into the news. I think there's news that so much is happening in the sport of MMA. It's been such a weird 2023, and it just has not stopped. In the last little while, Francis Ngannou and the UFC have failed to come to a contract agreement. They have stripped Francis Ngannou of the title, and now news has come out that Jon Jones and the top contender Ciryl Gane will be fighting for the undisputed title. T-Mobile Arena apparently leaked the poster. There's so many moving parts to this story, and I don't know where to start. But Melissa, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on this story? Like, what do you think? And tell us everything here.
You'll be surprised to know I actually don't want to watch an awful lot of MMA. Like, I'm not an MMA geek, let's call it. My husband, on the other hand, could tell you lashings of stories and history of MMA. However, my sort of input with this is obviously I trained over at MMA Factory in Paris, where Ciryl Gane's head coach, Mr. Lopez, is from. And Ciryl Gane is a very lovely guy, so I will be cheering for him. He complimented me on my fighting errors and said that James was a great coach. Ciryl Gane is good. He's a strong fighter. However, I feel that potentially he's not as technical as the other fighter. But he is strong. He is a big guy. And I guess the fight can go in any way. It just all depends on the story of the day.
Absolutely. Frazer, what do you think? What are your thoughts? Help me make sense of this.
Yeah, I'd love to help you make sense of it, but I cannot understand why you've got essentially the baddest man on the planet, Francis Ngannou. You've got a guy who has got a highlight reel as long as you want, knockout after knockout after knockout. And then even when he's not knocking people out, he's changing his style up against Ciryl Gane about a year ago, almost to the day, I imagine, to out wrestle Ciryl Gane. People were picking Ciryl Gane going into that fight, and Francis mixed it up and wrestled with him instead. And, he's had his injuries last year. And Dana's claiming, we couldn't sign him to a contract. Well, you've got a guy. It's not like he just sat out and just been sat out training and turning down fights. But from what we've heard, Dana said that he has turned down fights, and he would have been the highest paid heavyweight of all time, higher than Lesnar, higher than Velasquez back in the day, and obviously higher than Stipe and even Jon Jones, I think he's alluding to he'd be paid more than Jon Jones, and yet I'm struggling to agree with Dana. I don't think Francis Ngannou. I mean, just looking at him, I can't imagine he's scared of anybody, let alone a guy who's coming up in weight. We don't know what Jon Jones is going to look like at heavyweight, and to not be able to sign him to a contract at all, I think is the UFC's loss, and potentially either PFL or Bellator's gain. I think, not sure if the bigger named fights I think are at Bellator with you Ryan Bader's, obviously Fedor's last dance in a few weeks. But I think the bigger names are in Bellator, but the bigger money, if that's what Francis Ngannou is all about, which, knowing his backstory, you can't blame him for sort of following the money, is in the PFL, is in the super fight league of Jake Paul. Jake Paul could really be the thorn in Dana White's side, which is ironic after their back and forth in all of last year, which, I don't like to say it, we on this show especially think that Jake Paul is questionable for the sport, but there's no denying that he's doing good things for fighters now. Sorry, Melissa, you go.
No, I agree with your point. Like, me and my husband had this discussion. Like, for a dude that almost doesn't have to train, for the amount of money that he's got within his worth, like, he doesn't have to train how he trains. So in that, I rate him. However, it's almost as if he's making a joke of the situation and all of the MMA fighters and boxers that he is calling out, or in fact are reacting on what he is putting out there. But at the end of the day, he's bringing more noise than most people have bought in years. I think maybe McGregor is the only other person to bring so much noise to the sport publicly, to the non sort of athletic person, the non-average eye of MMA,
Yeah, for sure. And it's difficult. Yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, it's great to get like an actual fighter's perspective, because me and Tim can talk about it and say, fighters should be paid more, fighters should be paid more. But, I then go to my 9 to 5 job and sort of, get paid what I get paid. Whereas you guys, you're training each and every day. Like you say, you got, it's only January and you're already having to, in the back of your mind, you've got that constant anxiety, that worry about making weight, getting trained, obviously going into a fucking cage to fight somebody. But for Paul, I totally agree with you. It's finding that happy medium between, yes, he's bringing more eyes to the sport, which in turn maybe means more pay-per-view buys, which in turn maybe means more, sort of money for the fighters. But at the same time, is it good for the sport? Like you say, he could probably retire today. We don't have to see him on social media or training or fighting, and he'll live a very wealthy, happy lifestyle. But he does but try to better himself every day. It's hard to sort of, it's hard not to respect that. But at the same time, is he, like you say, making a bit of a mockery of it and sort of saying, I'm going to this to try and get one over on Dana White kind of thing? I'm not sure.
Well, I think look at it like, if someone like Jake Paul has now made, Francis Ngannou, the deal that they offered him apparently was more than the Fedor deal. So Fedor, they were saying, we'll do $6 million a fight for like 4 fights or something like that. They're saying we were offered Ngannou more money than that. So let's say they offered him $7 million. That's still less than what Jake Paul was making to beat up Ben Askren and beat up Tyron Woodley. And even Dana White said in the press conference, Francis Ngannou wants to fight lesser competition for more money. Dude, you criticized yourself there, Dana White. You said it. He will make more money anywhere else he goes. This is a product that the UFC actually ended up building themselves, because if you had, like, Francis Ngannou will make more money in one boxing fight than the entire heavyweight division got paid last year. And it's not a factor of like Jake Paul. Jake Paul took advantage of the way that the boxing pay structure is built, which is that the fighters get paid a ton of money. Francis Ngannou is at no fault for, if I take one boxing fight, even against a top 5 boxer, a top 10 boxer, I'll get paid more than my entire career. Something's a little bit funny going on here. When you compare these numbers, like, you have to look at it and like, the UFC has to be in the wrong here. Melissa, I don't know. Help me out here. Well, am I wrong? What do you think?
It's always been notoriously known that UFC's paydays are not as grand as, let's say, PFL. And the worst thing is as well, like, regarding UFC and sponsors, if you want to be able to associate yourself with a sponsor through the UFC, the sponsor actually has to pay the UFC directly. and sponsors don't want to do that, and that's where a lot of fighters' money comes from, is through sponsorship on those type of deals. I know, for example, Leah McCourt, she's on Bellator and she's making bucks and she's leading her own career. She's a very independent person within the sport herself. She chooses her fights, her sponsorships, her training. She's all self-funded, and it all comes from sponsorships and her fights, how much she gets paid and whatnot. Whereas a UFC fighter is literally gagging on to their next paycheck of fighting in a UFC, and you can only really fight 4 times a year, effectively, to have a very good and strong career in terms of winning. If you fight more than that, you're kind of blowing your own sort of gas trumpet too much, and therefore potentially causing a negative effect to yourself. So it is the contradictory sort of situation. The UFC will bring you more noise to your name, but in effect, it's just noise. Whereas someone like the PFL are currently going to be doing the league, who are going to be putting so much money behind different weight classes. And they're for example, they're building Dakota. Dakota is their 57 kilo queen at the moment. And she's sitting in with is it DAZN? I don't know if that's how you call it. She's sitting with them. She's got deals with
Block Acid.
Oh yes, exactly. She just signed with them. She just bought herself a bloody new car. Dude, she's 23, I think.
Yeah, she's young.
30 years old. She's sitting she's doing very, very, very well, and it just proves that PFL are clearly doing great things for her, because all of this stuff has happened while she sat with them in their brackets.
Yeah. So there's money to be made in MMA, maybe not in the UFC though. Frazer, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And going back to the Jon Jones situation, he signed an 8-fight deal. If Jon Jones fights 8 more fights, I mean,
I'd be surprised.
He'll be, I don't know how old he is now. He's what, early 30s now, but he's not fighting 8 more fights. There's no chance. He's had no fights in the past 3 or 4 years, so he's not going to be fighting 8 more fights all at heavyweight. Yes, he doesn't have to cut the weight and whatnot, but there's not 8 contenders out there for him to fight, to be honest. Oh, we got another guest. We have another guest. But yeah, with Jones, it's the Jones thing. Jones Gane fight, it confuses me slightly because France has been stripped. France is the undisputed champion without a doubt, and if Jones beats Gane, you then say, well, Jones hasn't fought Ngannou, so who's the real champion? Who's the undisputed champion? If Gane beats Jones, you can say, well, Ciryl Gane lost pretty convincingly to Francis Ngannou. It's going to be a good few years before we can legitimately say this is the best heavyweight on the planet, because Francis Ngannou is the best heavyweight on the planet, and at the moment, regardless of who wins in March, there's always going to be that asterisk next to it. It's a little bit like the lightweight division with Khabib. We're constantly asking, well, would Charles Oliveira have beaten Khabib? Would Charles Oliveira have beaten Khabib? Islam Makhachev, he's a teammate of Khabib, so would he have ever fought for the bout if it weren't for Khabib? Kind of thing. And it's difficult. It's like welterweight for a long time when GSP retired. Is Robbie Lawler really or Johnny Hendricks, are these guys really the best 170 pounder in the world? Or is it just because GSP sat out? It's like Henry Cejudo question now. Is Aljamain Sterling the best 135? We don't know, because Henry Cejudo could return and could absolutely dominate him. It's difficult. And as Mercy was alluding to there, PFL are building these guys. Rob Wilkinson now, having left the UFC off the back of 2 losses, I think it's 5 or 6 losses on the bounce, all finishes. Could he mix it with Alex Pereira? I think he probably could. Brendan Loughnane has been going back and forth with Charles Rosa. I don't know who Charles Rosa thinks he is, but I think Brendan would absolutely wipe the floor with him, to be honest. And for those of you that aren't following Brendan Loughnane on Twitter, get all over it, because even if you're having a bad day, just read through Brendan's tweets. It'll cheer you up. It's absolutely hilarious. It's classic British sort of comebacks to Charles Rosa. But Charles Rosa, with the greatest respect, isn't ranked in the top 15. And Brendan Loughnane's just beat, Chris Wade in London. He's just beat Bubba Jenkins. Like, these are top guys. Brandon can mix it, in my opinion, with the top five. And to not even be in the UFC and to be able to be that skilled and mix it with some of the best guys, I think, that's it. You can't now say that the UFC has sort of autonomy over all the best fighters in all the weight divisions, because the women's
talk.
Exactly, money talk. Exactly, it's the whole, I want to make it to the UFC. I want to make it to the UFC, and now people are saying, oh, maybe I'll try the PFL. Maybe I'll go to Bellator instead, because it's not the be all and end all now. I don't think to make it to the UFC, and it depends. If you want to, depends what your motivation is. If you're in it as a fight business, maybe you go to the PFL, because as Melissa was alluding to, Dakota's, there's no denying that the UFC would have built her, but there's no chance they would have built her in the way that the PFL have. She's very much the sort of the poster girl, especially at the lower weight. Obviously we've got Kayla as the poster girl at the 155, and but Dakota is quickly becoming. Kayla Harrison has had a career outside of MMA. Two-time Olympic gold medalist. We all know her backstory. Dakota's just starting her career. Like you said, she's still only 23, 24, and she's going to be a PFL star now for years to come, and then can join the UFC when she's financially set. I mean, like you said, she's not doing too badly for herself at the moment. She's got a lot of sponsorship deals, but what would be the motivation to join the UFC at the moment?
Exactly.
It's a difficult one for me, but it's great to get a professional fighter's view on it, because a lot of people say, do you train a UFC and all this? And it's just like, well, that's not it anymore. It's not for if I was going into fighting professionally, I wouldn't say the UFC is the be all and end all anymore.
No, I agree.
The president promoting slap fighting. It's a fucking joke, but you don't see any like the PFL has seemed to put a lot of emphasis lately on this European season. They've released the 4 dates. They're going to Newcastle in the UK. I think they're going to France, Germany, and then finishing off with the finals in Dublin on December 8th. They're already taking over the European market. Now the UFC is booked. Obviously, we've got the March date, and I think there's rumors of them returning to Paris. But there's no other. They haven't been anywhere else for pre-pandemic. They obviously went to Gdansk in Poland. They had the card in Hamburg. I think they had a Copenhagen card. They had a Glasgow card. But this is years ago. Bellator have always been active in Europe. The PFL obviously went to Cardiff and London last year. Obviously, you've got areas that sort of take over the French market, as it were. You've got KSW, Cage Warriors, and PFL are sort of becoming the big promotion within Europe, and UFC are taking a back step almost, and sort of exclusive. These fights in the Apex, like this weekend, there was no need for that fight card to be in the Apex, but it's a money saving thing. So I think the UFC and Dana White and Endeavor are far more concerned about financials and money than they are about actually putting the these are some of the best fights, but the best fight at heavyweight includes Francis Ngannou, and that they weren't able to come to an agreement, which is it's disappointing.
The UFC has had that legitimacy issue at some points in the past. Like BJ Penn left with the title at one point and just toured Japan for a while. And for years, Sean Sherk was not the number one ranked guy. It was BJ Penn who was overseas. It's a rare thing, but most of these guys like Randy Couture and BJ Penn came back to the UFC at one point. So I don't know, Francis Ngannou will take a tour, do some boxing, maybe PFL, maybe Bellator, make more money than he ever has in his life, and maybe come back to the UFC at some point. We'll have to see. But I do want to ask, so on the actual Jon Jones Ciryl Gane fight, one of our former writers, Ed Gallo, had a theory that if you don't drill wrestling every day, you will lose your wrestling skill. And his theory was looking at Jon Jones's career of this guy was a very good wrestler. And the reason I'm saying this is because if Francis Ngannou could out-wrestle Ciryl Gane, you have to think Jon Jones can out-wrestle Ciryl Gane. But if he hasn't been drilling wrestling for 10 years. So Melissa, I'll ask you directly, as a fighter, is wrestling, if it's something you're not drilling and working on every day, is it a skill that deteriorates with time?
I don't think I can actually physically answer that because I feel like when you learn something, like breakdancing, I know how to breakdance, and I've breakdanced for prior MMA for like 6 years. I physically can't do what I used to do then now. And granted, I'm older. Granted, I'm more broken because of MMA. But like how I think of it is wrestling is like chain link. So one move leads to the next, sets up the next, sets up the next. And those patterns aren't always the same. They change depending on how the person moves. So you need to like notoriously know those movements, like you're cheating on a test almost, because they don't come like naturally unless you know them. Like I could name you 5 moves off the top of my hand, but none of them connect in the way that they should, because there's all these little neuro sort of movements that need them to connect somehow. Like that's just my opinion of it. Like there's a fighter. I generally wish James was here right now because this conversation would be flowing. But there's a fighter, and he doesn't spar anymore because he knows he knows how it's gonna pan out and play because he knows how he moves. So in my opinion, I think it just generally depends on like who you are, what you're about. Like some people believe in cage rust, I don't. And some people believe that will affect them. So I think it just generally depends on who you are.
Frazer, last word on the subject goes to you.
Yeah, I just think, it's interesting because we haven't seen Jon Jones since, I've got it, February 8th, 2020 against Dominic Reyes, where it was an unconvincing victory. Then against Thiago Santos, if Thiago Santos hadn't blew out his knees, pretty unconvincing victory again. Anthony Smith, pretty unconvincing victory. If you remember his fight before that, Alexander Gustafsson, he got moved from Vegas to California, or
Yes.
from California to Vegas? Yeah, so because of the picogram situation. That was his last convincing win, I think. Alexander Gustafsson in 2018. It's going to be difficult for Jon Jones to he's now got a heavyweight frame, and he was never a fighter that put a crazy pace on you. He was always very methodical, and this is in his light heavyweight days, very methodical, quite a slow fighter to get, but then when he wanted to go, he could go. How much, what is he going to weigh in at? Is he going to be a 265, or is he going to be a Chris Daukaus at 225? I imagine he'll be around 255, 260. To take that much time off and only put on sort of 20 odd pounds it seems like a waste of time. It would appear that he maybe should have got fully into this heavyweight frame of it. But how is he going to fight? With the as Melissa was alluding to there, he's got the ingrained skills. We know that he's 26-1 with a no contest against Daniel Cormier, and that one loss was a DQ. So, let's say 27-0. He's made the walk 28 times with the no contest against Dan, and he's fought some of the best guys. Daniel Cormier wasn't able to take him down. Yeah. He's obviously dominated Glover Teixeira, who we'll go on to talk about in a little bit. Alexander Gustafsson twice. Dominic Reyes when Dominic Reyes was undefeated. Chael Sonnen, Vitor Belfort, Rashad Evans, Lyoto Machida, Quint. I mean, I could carry on, but it's just an embarrassment of riches, and he's got that ingrained skill. But how will it go to heavyweight? Ciryl Gane, Melissa will be able to allude to this more. Isn't making light heavyweight unless he chops an arm or a leg off. The guy,
he's a big dude.
He's a big guy, and
tall as well.
Exactly. These are things that maybe just got it here. 6'4", Ciryl Gane. Jesus, Jon Jones 6'4", but Jon Jones has got the longer reach. But it's being able to use that reach. Yeah, because Ciryl Gane is fast. We've seen that. We saw against Taito Avasa in Paris in September. Once he smells blood, he can switch it on and go from 0 to 100 quickly. Is Jon Jones going to be prepared for that? Because not only is he, Ciryl Gane's probably, aside from maybe Tom Aspinall, the fastest heavyweight in the division. Speed kills, and I really think that could be a factor. Not only is Jon Jones now being hit by a legitimate heavyweight, but he's being hit by a legitimate heavyweight at speed. And this is, he's a stand-up guy, and yes, his takedown defense is questionable, but that was a year ago. How do we know that Ciryl Gane hasn't been drilling takedown defense every single day for the past 52 weeks, for the past 365 days? We didn't really see it against Tai Tuivasa because Tai was never going to go in there and try and double leg him. But it's such an intriguing fight. But I just think it should be for an interim belt, and Francis Ngannou should still be in the promotion. But it is what it is. March 5th or March 4th, I think the fight goes down. I'm complaining. I will watch it. I will watch the hell out of it, and I will analyze it beforehand because it is going to be a banger. But I'm going to struggle to call it undisputed if we've still got Francis Ngannou walking the planet as the baddest man on the planet. And, as you alluded to, PFL, Bellator, boxing, as far as I'm concerned, BKFC can fuck right off. And we can keep the actual fighting promotions or boxing. I don't want to see him in BKFC. It doesn't entertain me at all.
Man, so the other day, One Championship did their open weight Grand Prix announcement. They said, we're putting up $1 million to the open weight Grand Prix. They put Alistair Overeem on the poster, who's signed under a different organization. But other people have said, like, this is actually a way to attract Francis Ngannou. And then BKFC stood up and said, we're trying to get Francis Ngannou. Like, man, this is the hottest, what's the word, free agent that we've had in decades. This is a big one. Anyway, we got to move forward. Let's do a quick One Championship word. Had a great kickboxing battle this weekend between Superbon and Shinkies Alazov. Shinkies Alazov earned a second round knockout. Absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. Frazer, what did you think? We'll just do a quick word on it and then get to UFC 283.
It was, shocking is the word. We were talking about it last week on the show that the Superbon is pound for pound greatness.
Yes.
At this weight, at this in this sport of kickboxing, and but Alastov just almost flew under the radar. I was watching highlights of it before I managed to watch the whole fight, and one of the highlights I saw, he's gone calf kick, body kick, Superman punch, and landed all three of them. And it's like, you don't do that. You just don't. I can't even move that quickly kicking air, let alone kicking and being scared of the comeback as well. Phenomenal performance. And, it topped off what was quite a really good night for One Championship. Disappointing with the stamp fight falling out, but glad that they managed to get a fight, over the line. Yeah, exactly. But what do you do when you've got a star like that and you don't want her to fall off the card? Then you've got to put her in, and then like you say, controversial because did she get a little bit of sort of a nod because she is the bigger name in my opinion.
She is. Absolutely.
We saw Rod Tang compete in kickboxing, which is it's just fun, isn't it? It's just jab, faking jabs to the body, jabs to the head, jab to the body, jab to the head. Rod Tang gonna do Rod Tang thing. They shock horror, Gary Tonin finishes the fight by submission. Well, yeah, of course he did. Yeah, it's just like, but no, it's a really good card. Really, like we said last week, if you missed it, go back and watch it because it's a fun card. And if you can only watch one fight, I'd definitely watch the main event and have in the back of your head just how good Superbon is, and that makes the Alisov performance just that much better.
Melissa, it sounds like you watched some of the fights this weekend. Is that right?
I tend to watch like highlights and clips caught from people reposting and stuff. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not much of a fan of watching MMA unless it's like a fight. Like you guys sound literally critical of every moment, and I'm like, what? But I caught some of the highlights. I'm obviously female, so I like to watch female fights. I caught up on the Stamp versus Supergirl.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, I do think that Stamp got the nod based on her sort of being. I
agree.
found she was backed up. She was on her back foot a lot. She was against the cage a lot. feel the Supergirl landed a lot more cleaner shots.
Yeah, no, I do co-sign. I was a little bit surprised. It's like Stamp was fighting someone who was bigger, taller, bigger weight class. So it was a little bit tougher for her. But I thought the same thing. Stamp probably didn't win that fight, and Supergirl deserved to win. It was a split decision, but you know what? At the end of the day, Supergirl doesn't return my messages, and Stamp does. So whatever. So Stamp won. So let's talk to UFC 283. It's a big one. It feels like we've been waiting for a few months for have a real, like a major UFC event, and finally we got it. We had a little bit of a mess with the light heavyweight title going down, but now we got this weekend. We got Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno, and then we're gonna have Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill. Even though I think we had a mess with the light heavyweight division, I managed to get really excited for this upcoming Rio de Janeiro card. Melissa, let's start with you. What do you make of the main event, Glover Teixeira and Jamal Hill? What are your thoughts? What do you make of this one? Frazer, go ahead. Frazer, actually, sorry, I misspoke. Frazer, please go ahead.
No, I think, as far as a late notice fight, we got this fight booked, a month ago, 6 weeks ago. I mean, there's certainly worse fights to book on 6 weeks notice to headline in Brazil. Glover Teixeira returns to Brazil for the first time in a long while, I think. I can't recall the last time Glover fought in Brazil.
It's been a minute. I'm going to say at least a decade.
Yeah, Brazil, he hasn't fought in Brazil. 2015 when he beat Patrick Cummins by TKO in the second round. That's a long time for a Brazilian. He is a Brazilian native. He does live in the US, of course. But for me, I'm wondering how much that Jiří Procházka fight took out of Glover Teixeira. That was a war for best part of 25 minutes before he was subbed. I think he's got 2 or 3 rounds to get Jamal Hill out of there, or at least get Jamal Hill on the ground. Jamal Hill, his one UFC loss has come with when Paul Craig made his arm, took the bones out of his arm and snapped his arm to bits and just essentially just beat the shit out of him. And it's I think it's a striker versus grappler. Teixeira is going to try and get this to the floor. Jamal Hill, takedown stats. Takedown average per 15 minutes, 0. Takedown accuracy, 0. He's never shot for a takedown. He loves to keep it standing. And rightfully so, that Johnny Walker knockout, the Jimmy Crute finish I think he finished Jimmy Crute, yeah, and then the Thiago Santos finish, he is effective on the feet, and I think he's effective defensively grappling. But I just think that it's a really hard one to pick because on paper, I think Jamal Hill wins it. He's had 13 fights. Glover Teixeira's had about 1,300 fights, but the thing is, I think Jamal Hill's a heavier hitter. And I think that might pay dividends in this one because of the war that Glover went through. Was it June, July? 6-7 months off is not an awfully long time.
It's a tough one because Glover not only gone through wars since in the last year, his entire career has just been putting wear and tear on his body. This guy trained with Chuck Liddell. That's how long he's been hanging out in the sport. And Jamal Hill, like I'll say it directly, he's not as talented as Glover Teixeira, and I think Jamal Hill might win this fight. All he needs is one punch, and Glover is a tough as nails guy who gets hit a lot in fights. Even in his prime, he was getting hit. He's lost his step. He has slowed down. I think it's going to spoil the party in Brazil. Melissa, how much does hometown advantage actually play into a fight in the cage? Because us as fans and as like media, we think it's a very important thing and we think it's a factor. As a fighter, what do you think?
I've been in sport a long time, like general sport, and I've always read about like home advantage and whatnot. I think I felt it the most when I actually fought a French woman in a French nation, in the French city, of Paris. And for me at that time, it was overcast with sort of the excitement of being on a larger platform, and like sort of all the new experiences that come along with that. Thinking about it, like backhand, I performed very, very, very well in front of a home crowd. I find that when I'm in France, I struggle to eat. I'm not sure quite the good places to go to or the foods that are going to help with my weight cut. Like I went to a sushi poke bowl restaurant, and I asked for like no salt of any kind. Like I didn't want soy sauce. That was completely lost in translation. Ended up having avocado, soy sauce, rice, and all of the things I shouldn't be having in weight cut week, which didn't aid to my weight cut of that fight. Obviously, Rizlin had a massive home crowd. Almost in a sense, you could suggest that I was fed to her by the promotion on and expected to lose. Her being like a judoka female fighter from their like primary gym of France, or the most notorious said gym in France. So I think if I didn't have all of the feelings of first time experience, I think they would have come into effect a lot more. However, as I said, it was sort of overcast by the feelings of excitement and sort of adrenaline and stuff like this. But yeah, if you look at like the Leon fight, the first time round where they were in Utah, and like UK has nothing in comparison to like, what was it? The air.
Oh, the
altitude.
elevation. Yeah,
altitude. That was it.
Yeah.
Like, I think not being flown over there early enough in his camp, obviously that paid a massive disadvantage to him. So yeah, in a sense, home advantage is massive.
Absolutely.
Especially
Frazer,
when
please
you're
go ahead.
used to.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, carry on.
No,
Sorry.
you know, obviously we've got the Leon versus Kamaru trilogy fight now confirmed for the O2, and you know Leon trains not far from me and Melissa in Birmingham. It's an hour train journey down to London. The air isn't going to change from Birmingham down to London. He's going to know all the good places to eat. He's going to have his connections down in London with all the guys down there, and I think that will play a big advantage for Leon. You know, Kamaru Usman, off the top of my head, has never fought in the UK. I'm pretty sure he hasn't fought in the UK, and Leon has. You know, he's been on pretty much every UFC London. He's literally made the walk in the O2 as a co-main event against Gunnar Nelson a few years. I think that was not the card just gone, but the card before that. I think, as far as you know, Glover obviously lives in the US, but he's going to have the Brazilian crowd behind him. I think Leon, you know, obviously English guy, and you know, prior to his win, I don't think a lot of UK fans got behind Leon because it wasn't the most exciting style. It wasn't he wasn't the massive talker. He wasn't a big shit talker. And now he's almost not Kamaru. I'm not even convinced Kamaru Usman's come around yet from that head kick back in August. I think there's massive hype around Leon Edwards, not only in the wider UFC realm, but especially in the UK and especially in Birmingham. You know, you're going to have all these guys, and it was just announced last week that Bellator, I think, are returning to Paris maybe, and it's Leon Edwards' brother Fabian taking on Gegard Mousasi. You know, so the guys are going to be in training camp around the same time. I think that's going to be a big factor as well, that they're both going to be looking to peak around the same time. And you know, going back to UFC 283, I think there's a lot of Brazilians on this card, and it all depending on how they do, it could really flatline in the main event. If you've got 4 Brazilians coming off losses in the first 4 fights before, the crowd could be a little bit flat. And it's, you know, I think that's a big factor, because none of the Brazilian guys are in an easy fight. You know, none of these are gimmies. And especially, you know, you've got, like I say, a lot, pretty much just looking down the card now, almost every single fight has a Brazilian fighter in it. That could go quite badly, depending on results prior to you know, we saw Dan Ige fight this weekend. Luckily, he was able to get the knockout, but he watched his childhood friend Puna Soriano get knocked out. How much did that affect you? I'm not quite sure, but like I say, if all the Brazilian guys or a lot of the Brazilian guys lose or they're, you know, boring fights or whatnot ahead of the main event or the co-main event, I think that could play a big factor.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. I remember the first Brazilian event they had. Nogueira got a win over Brendan Schaub, and that just felt like that got the rest of the Brazilian fighters kind of lit. Seeing a legend get a win like that. If Shogun loses on the undercard, That's it. Put a wrap on the Brazilian fighters. They're not watching anymore. But let's go to the co-main event. Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno will be battling for the fourth time, I believe. They've got a draw, a win, and a win each at this point. So it is actually a tied record going into this fight. And I don't think there's a bad pick in it. If you think the jab of Brandon Moreno will pull through as it has before, sure. If you think the power of Deiveson Figueiredo will pull through, sure. Yeah, whatever. I don't know. What do you guys? What do you make of this fight? I don't know who to pick because I've seen it all between their 70 minutes they've been fighting or something insane like that. Like you know what I mean? What do you guys think?
From the sort of sports psychology sort of side of things, not that I'm a sports psychologist. I think when you know sort of that person, like let's just say I spar someone daily, weekly, you kind of know how they feel, their process, their feel out. But when it becomes a fight, you never know like how the process is going to pan out. However, if they've already fought each other 3 times, sitting in that cage again is just going to feel like a spar almost, just with that sort of. They're both level playing fields. Like they both want to win the fight, obviously, but like there's nothing behind them now. Like if they're both at sort of a draw in a situation, that situation's behind them. This fight that counts now. Whereas if it was one of them sort of in a higher win bracket at between them both, then you would feel like the confident guy would be the one that's been winning more so than the one that's less confident, but he would have more of a sort of drive in training to train harder. So it kind of depends on who's bringing what to the table and if they're able to counter the game that previously they struggled with.
Well, this is what I think is fascinating because obviously, Brandon Moreno beats Figueiredo, goes into the second fight, loses the second fight, then goes into his interim title fight with Kai Kara France I think it was in July, with James Krause in his corner. No, he's not got James Krause in his corner this time. He's got Saif Saud at Fortis MMA. How much is that going to make, as you alluded to, can you counter your opponent's game plan? Well, what are we going to see something new? This is 3 different trainers in 3 different fights for Brandon Moreno now, I believe. I've never fought, but let's say, a month out from your fight in April, for whatever reason, your husband can't corner you, your normal corner team can't corner you. Do you think that'll play into it a little bit? Having new voices in your ear between rounds and before the fight and fight week and whatnot.
I've kind of got experience in that. So when I was the amateur, I went to the IMAFs, and in the IMAFs we're not allowed our normal head coaches. It's not that you're not allowed them; they have to pay a lot of money in order to be there. And at the time, that situation wasn't allowed. It wasn't possible. Sorry. I found it quite hard to be coached by humans that don't quite understand you and how you're feeling. They don't know how to quite warm you up. Like thinking about warm-ups that I've done with James, like he can tell when I'm switched on or how to switch me on or what I need in order to sort of comprehend the situation that's about to happen. In the IMAF, it was almost kind of, you go in there, you do a job, you come out. Like there is generally no emotion in it. Like you don't feel it for your team. However, when your team is there, you feel it for your team. It's very emotional. When I beat Mafalda, like although I beat her, I still was so upset by my performance because my team, I felt like I let them down, and I didn't perform how I wanted to perform in the cage. But as I've said like 3 or 2 times now so far, like it all depends on the night and what comes together. And I generally do think that you need that sort of switch on in the corner to tell you what you need in order to win the next round. And that small sort of catching your personality that they understand, that's going to turn that around for you. So yeah, in my opinion, I think it does matter who's in your corner and who you've built that relationship with and how they know your triggers. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, your situation is amplified because obviously your husband's in your corner, so you have that relationship outside of the cage, and then in the cage it's the coach-fighter relationship. But with Brandon Moreno, he doesn't know Sayif Saud, and Sayif Saud can't just put his all into Brandon. And I'm not saying that James Krause put his all into Brandon Moreno, but that was James Krause's. I'm pretty sure, it was his second championship fight. He had Megan Anderson, who just got absolutely dominated by Amanda Nunes. It didn't come to a great surprise, but
Not surprised.
Exactly, yeah. I think it wouldn't matter. It could have put James Krause in there at 170 pounds. He probably would have been dominated by Nunes. But I think it was James Krause's first champion and one of the best opportunities heading into that title fight to get a world champion at Glory MMA, and that it's difficult for Moreno because he no longer has that relationship with James Krause, because James Krause is not going to be in his corner. Like I say Saud, he's got Jeff Neal. Jeff Neal was preparing for a fight this past weekend, didn't go ahead. He's now preparing for a March date. He's got Raul Rosas. I've seen the Moreno and Raul Rosas have been training together. Saud cannot be going in 100% with Brandon Moreno, which I do think, alluding to what Melissa was saying, he doesn't know his triggers. He doesn't know, how Brandon's going to be affected by fighting at home. Away. In Brazil. Davidson Figueiredo is the Brazilian in this situation. He is the native guy, the native speaker. And Sayif Saud, I don't know how. I'm not saying Sayif Saud is a bad coach by any stretch of the imagination, but it's going to be difficult to coach a guy that you've only had the best part of a month and a half, maybe even only a month sort of training. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for Moreno to maybe understand what Sayif Saud wants from him, because there's potentially a communication barrier there between coach and fighter, not knowing fully what makes your fighter tick and then what your coach wants from you. You can say, kick to the body or follow up your jab with the hook, but
anyone can analyze the situation, but it's how you analyze it and then make it specific to your fighter.
Exactly. I can sit on the sofa and say, Brandon Moreno really needs to, Figueiredo's lead legs there, slam the lead leg or keep to the jab or throw the liver kick that you threw against Kai Kara France. And that's easy for me to say sat on the sofa 1,000 miles away. But in the moment, can Sayif Saud calm his fighter down? We've only got the best part. They say it's a minute between rounds, and Melissa will allude to this more than me. It's a minute between rounds, but by the time you get back to your corner gets your stool in there. And then your corner at the end of the minute, the corner has to obviously get out. It's you're talking sort of 45 to 50 seconds.
It goes quick as well. Exactly. And it's not even that. You can't the first couple of 20 seconds, you're not listening to a word, especially if it's been a hard round. You're sat there like, what the fuck am I doing?
Well, that's right. You were covered in blood and everything, and it's just and you're supposed to be able to be switched on straight away. You've been cut, and you're supposed to be able to switch on straight away, listen to your corner, take on all the advice, and then implement it all within a minute. It's unrealistic, really. And this is what we're kind of saying. You in a way, you're quite lucky that your fight ended just before, a second or 2 seconds before the round, because as you kind of alluded to, for that first 20 seconds, you're not even listening, or you're not being able to comprehend what your coach is saying, let alone when you're suffering. Obviously you had quite a nasty cut in that one. They've then got, let's say Brandon Moreno, he was cut last time against Kai Kara France. Let's say that cut opens back up. Can he go back to the corner, have the cut man, shoving God knows what in the cut, and then trying to listen to a new voice and try and catch his breath and try and, keep the crowd out? It's going to be interesting to see how Brandon Moreno handles the whole situation, especially, with a new coach. I think if he wins this one, I think it probably goes down as the biggest win of his career, purely because of all the outside factors.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, no doubt. Melissa, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
No, I do agree. I feel that obviously if he overcomes the external factors of the situation, it also depends if he sees of what we've just discussed as an external factor or external factors. Like maybe he's just completely coachable to any scenario, to any person, and he's that guy, he can just listen to instruction. Fighting is individual. everyone is different. Many factors prior to him stepping in that cage could affect him alone as a person, that even his average Joe cornerman might not be able to change how he's feeling, you know. So I could say all these things, and I am saying all these things, but it will literally just depend on that day. And as soon as he steps onto that sort of bus coach car and he's switching on, preparing to fight, what is going through his mind, what he's experienced, and how he's going to deal with all of those factors. Maybe he's had the fucking best time of his life, and he's going in there with every meaning of being that he's trained for in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I never thought that, you know, we're saying, the outside factor, the new coach, the fact that he's going into enemy territory, the fact that he had this cut in his last fight. He might just see that as, I've got a new coach. I'm dealing. Me and Safeside have got a really good relationship. You know, I should have come to Fortis MMA years ago. I love stepping into enemy territory. I'm from Mexico. He's from Brazil. It's a nation versus nation thing. And I never quite thought of, if he doesn't see it as an, you know, we're building it up into be some massive, oh my god, big issue, and he's probably just like, I'm not really asked. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to fuck him up, and I'm going to leave the champion. Happy days. It's interesting. It's in an interesting point.
Well, we just got a few minutes left, so let's rapid fire the rest of the card here. We'll just get one-word answers from each of you. Giblert Burns versus Neil Magny. Melissa, what do you think?
Burns.
All right,
Burns.
Frazer?
Burns. No offense to Magny, but he got subbed by our boy Shavkat, so I think he maybe even gets subbed by Burns.
Yeah, it's a Gilbert Burns win. Lauren Murphy versus Jessica Andrade. Melissa, what do you think?
Ooh, Jessica Andrade. I don't like Murphy. I think he's it.
Fraser, what do you think?
I agree. I think if you're getting fucked up by Valentina Shevchenko in your was it the last fight or the last but one fight? I think Jessica Andrade also probably fighting at home again in Brazil probably knocks her out.
Yeah, in the light heavyweight showdown, Big Paul Craig from Scotland versus Brazil's home Johnny Walker. Melissa, what do you make of it?
I like Paul Craig. I like him as a fighter. I like him as a person. Sorry, that wasn't one word.
No, that's fair. That's perfect. Fraser, what do you think?
Drew all day. I think, you know, he had a rough performance last time out against Volkan Ozdemir when he tried to constantly pull guard. It wasn't quite going his way. But Johnny Walker for me is too erratic. He throws too many crazy shots for Walker not to for Paul Craig not to just run the pipe, get him down. And as Paul Craig always says, is tap, snap, or nap. I think he subs him.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you on that one. Last one we'll cover off: Shogun versus literally some guy they found. Melissa, does Shogun get a win in his retirement fight?
No.
No. Oh, my heart. Fraser, what do you think?
I'm crossing all my fingers to the MMA gods, but I'm just looking down the guy's record. He's got a hell of a lot of finishes, but then you look at the guys that he's finishing. He's 18-3, but 3 or 4 fights ago he was fighting a guy with no professional fights. He was fighting a guy who had no wins and 3 losses. And as soon as he stepped into the UFC, standing TKO, I'm hoping Shogun rolls back the clock. And, you know, we'll re-release your article up on our socials this week, Tim, where you spoke to all and sundry about Shogun. And, you know, let's hope that he can just turn back the clock and fuck a guy up, but it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, he's. I would like to see him win in his last fight, but he was struggling years ago with Gian Villante and Tyson Pedro. Like he wasn't in shape 4 or 5 years ago. Like I don't know. It's going to be really tough with multiple knee surgeries. They couldn't have found like an easier kind of opponent to send him away with. We all know what this is, but even then, I'm going to think he's going to struggle. Anyway, Tim Wheaton, Frazer Krohn, MMA Sucka. All the links will be down below for what's going on. Melissa, last word goes to you. Talk us on out of here. Tell the folks where they can find more of you. What do you have upcoming? All that good stuff.
Okay, so my name's Melissa Dixon. I'm a bantamweight fighter for Ares Fighting Promotion. I own 2 dogs. I am married to James Dixon, who is a very great and underrated fighter. You may find me on Instagram at no Mess Mullins. That is my sort of hashtag.
I'll link it down below.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for enlightening me that I need to do more MMA research before coming onto podcast. No, I joke. I'm very open about not being able to talk quite frankly about sort of MMA as a whole. I'm more sort of, I do MMA, I'm focused on MMA, and I can talk to you around sport and psychology and science, but that's just me, it's my thing, you know. So yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I had fun. I actually enjoyed it, so it's actually sort of goaded me to go and do a bit more research regarding fighters and maybe watch a bit more. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.